Hey everyone, welcome to day 10 of the Django Bootcamp. Of course, this is our final day of this live bootcamp, but that doesn't mean we're done with everything that we've, attempted to do inside of Django. There's still a lot that we want to cover with Django in general, which I'll discuss that towards the end of this. So the goal here is to actually style our Django project a little bit more and fix a few bugs that are throughout the project. So this one is really just a quick review while also implementing the Bootstrap framework. Now you can use this same methodology for any kind of framework, but I know Bootstrap really well, and it's also incredibly popular. So what we're going to be doing here initially is solving some of the bugs that we have had, and then also actually starting to think about how we would use styles dynamically with some sort of Boolean value in a Django view or project. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's take a look. So here is my site right now. I added a new product and I call it Turing Pie. Turing Pie is actually a really cool product itself. They sent me one. I'm really excited to do some stuff on it. But anyways, so with this product here, we actually do want to purchase it. There is a shipping address requirement and a billing address requirement and all that. So what I want to do now is I want to actually look at the product itself and take a look at the content here. Right, so I actually put in some HTML directly from their page, right? But it's not actually rendering. I definitely saved it, but it's not rendering on my detail page. So naturally, that is a little bit of a bug. I actually do want that HTML to render. Now, you're probably going to not want HTML to render if it's just a random user, right? So if it's user-generated content, you probably won't want to show HTML because that might not be secure, right? More than likely, it won't be secure to just render out some random HTML. There is something called Markdown. Markdown is a somewhat safe way to render user HTML, so Markdown. But that gets a little bit more advanced, and you would probably need to use some JavaScript to actually render the Markdown and also get rid of various things that's related to some HTML. So there is a template tag. So if we look up Django safe template filter or template tag, so this filter itself will actually allow you to make HTML render. So if we click on safe here, we see that we have these bars here for safe and then one for escape. Okay, so let's actually take a look at what that does and why it's important to know about it. So inside of that detail snippet, this is actually where we have the content. I already have a little glitch or error there, so it should say .content. That's part of the reason it wasn't showing up. So if I refresh in here, this is what I get. Okay, so there is a couple things to consider here. Number one is if I didn't use HTML, I might want to have my line breaks in here. So line breaks is another filter that will allow you to render out exactly how you save it in the field itself, right? So I have a bunch of line breaks in here, and now it's actually rendering out that way. And if you just wanted to show the code of this, what you can also do is change the p tag into a pre tag, as in pre-formatted, and then inside of that, you would actually just wrap it around a code tag, and this will actually show you that same code, right? So as actual code, which I think is pretty cool. So it's kind of hard to tell with the HTML that I have right now, but it definitely is inside of code in here. Okay, cool. So now that we've got that, let's actually use the safe tag. I don't want the code or the pre. I don't really need those things. It's just worth knowing about. So if I say safe pipe escape. So these are pipes straight up and down. Let's take a look at what that looks like. Now if I refresh in here, it actually renders out that HTML as I initially wanted it to. Right, and this, again, this is coming directly from their code. I didn't actually make this or anything like that. It's just literally from them. But it does actually use my styles, right? So we definitely want to solve that at some point. Okay, so the next thing is this purchase button. I probably need to solve this thing, also make this look a little bit better. But now here's the shipping address problem that we've faced with digital items, right? So if there is a digital item, then well, we want to actually allow this to be empty, or actually not even showing up, rather, instead of being empty. So there are multiple approaches for this. One of them, if we go into our actual forms for this order, one of them is actually to have two different kinds of order forms. One for a digital product and one for a shipping product. Because if it's a shipping product, these fields probably should be required, right? And if it's a digital product, they probably shouldn't be. In the long run, I would actually go that method. I would have two different forms based off of the product type it is, instead of trying to add a bunch of conditional logic inside of this single order form. I would have two different places for it. But I'm not going to do that right now. I just wanted to mention that's what I would want to do. What I'm going to do right now is just leave it as is and allow shipping and billing to be blank and assume that, hey, we can just hit up the customer later and say, hey, we don't have your shipping details or your billing details, so please add them. That would be, a follow-up thing that you might end up doing. So that's kind of a cheap shortcut, but it is one that I will stick with. But what I want to do is actually allow my shipping address and billing address to be hidden dynamically without using JavaScript, with straight up using CSS, and that's it. Okay, so let's actually inspect the element here and take a look at the entire field itself. So we've got this label for shipping address, okay, and then a label for has this ID, and then ID also has that, right? Okay, so a quick way to get rid of that label or just not even show it is to override what comes in on this shipping address. So I think this is actually pretty common. So we'll do forms.char field. Now you're like, hey, wait, this is a text area field. How come I'm using a char field here? Well, the text area is actually a widget. So we'll go ahead and say widget equals to forms.text area. And now if I refresh in here, it actually shouldn't change, right? So assuming that I did everything correct, shipping address, there we go. And so now in here, I can add in those attributes. So I know I discussed this already, but now is actually a practical time that we might want to have it. So I'm going to go ahead and add a class, and we'll say that digital, or actually we won't say digital, but we'll call this my shipping address class. Okay, so we'll save that and we'll refresh in here. Again, inspecting the element on that input, we see now I've got this shipping address class. And since I'm going to be using Bootstrap, let's actually change this to being a proper CSS class. Not snake case, but just slugified or like this, basically. I'm also going to add in form-control. Okay, so that is going to be a Bootstrap form then, but we see that we actually are changing that class. So one of the other things that you might try is being like, oh, well, what if I changed rows to like, I don't know, 3? So the default right now is 10, but if I change it to 3, what does it look like? Oh, it's a little bit smaller. That's actually pretty nice. That's a lot better. Next would be, placeholder, and we'll go ahead and say your shipping address. Okay, so we refresh there, and there we go. Okay, so what I also want to do is get rid of the label. So outside of the text area here, I'm going to go ahead and hit enter on that. We'll go ahead and say label equals to, well, what do you know? Just an empty string. And when you do that, what you get is no label anymore. Right, so if we inspect the element here, we see there's no label there any longer. So that's really nice. The actual input or the actual HTML tag or HTML element is no longer there either, which is really cool. So I can do the same thing for the billing address because I want to. Definitely want to do this for billing as well. And now it's just the billing address class and your billing address. Okay, so we save that and refresh, and what do you know? It already looks a little bit better, right? So the placeholder and all this stuff is great. And I did mention that we could have two different forms in here. But what I want to do is now also add, if the product requires shipping, then we'll actually at least have the validation error in there, right? So I do want to at least have it that, hey, if you do need shipping, we don't always need to make a whole nother form for it. In this case. So let's go ahead and take a look at the product itself to see if it does require shipping or if I have something that's related to that. right? So right now I've got has inventory. That's close, I guess. Is digital. Well, is digital is very similar, excuse me, to requires shipping. So I'll go ahead and say requires shipping is the opposite of is digital. So basically not is digital, right? Again, it's a property, still using a property. Okay, cool. So requires shipping. Notice that doesn't mean that I shouldn't have an empty billing. So the billing address itself, we're probably never going to get rid of, right? So if they're buying a digital item, we definitely want to have their billing address because we would essentially associate to the card that they're buying it with. And also, if we do need them to require shipping, well, that should happen in the form as well. So in here, if the product's not none, of course, well, we definitely want the product. And then we also want to see if we have a shipping address. So first and foremost, we'll go ahead and say shipping address equals to cleaned data.get and shipping address. And now if the product, so if self.product requires shipping and shipping address is equal to an empty string, or self.product.requires shipping. Let's actually break this down so it's a little easier to see that. And shipping address equals to none. Okay, so this condition here is going to be true on one of those things, right? Or either one of those things. So if it's an empty string or if it's an empty value, more than likely it will be an empty string because of how we're going to be submitting it if it is empty. But now we have at least a validation error to say, hey, the require shipping is in there, and we can now say, please enter your shipping address. Now, a bug that I haven't fully sorted out yet was the forms error. I actually think it's just self.add error, and we'll go ahead and say shipping address and then the message itself. I actually don't think I need to raise it. I think I just add the error that way, like we did here. So that I think that solves the glitch that we had before. Okay, so let's actually go ahead and try this out now. So the Turing Pie itself does require shipping. It does not have a digital item in here. And again, this might actually be a Boolean value that you put in there because perhaps it is a digital item, but it also has a shippable item as well. So perhaps this is not the best way to do it in the long run, but it's just perfectly fine for what we've got. Okay, so going back into this checkout, I'm still in here. I'm going to go ahead and hit complete order. And now it's saying, please fill out this field. Wait a minute. I never made that required. So let's go ahead and inspect the element here. And what we see here is it's now saying required. Okay, so I certainly did not make that shipping address required. That actually came in with the form by default. Okay, so using forms.character field or char field here, by default that they are required. So we're going to go ahead and say required equals to false. And that's why I actually got that browser-based validation, right? So the browser-based validation is what we saw. So if I now hit it, that is a browser-based validation. Django is not doing anything related to that. But that one single flag will change how it actually renders. Now if I hit complete order, now it's going to say my billing address is required, which actually makes sense. We do want our billing address in there. This, of course, doesn't mean there is a way to override that, or if the browser is not necessarily doing it, then yeah, we might actually run into a situation where they can actually still submit it. But what we got here is we actually are making sure that the shipping or the product itself has a requirement for shipping, and then therefore this is another kind of validation as well. Okay, cool. So now that we've got that, let's go ahead and actually try this out. This shipping address, I'm not actually doing any validation on these addresses, of course. I'm going to go ahead and hit complete order, and we've got success. But why? Why do we have success? Okay, so that actually should have raised a validation error itself. So I'm thinking that maybe this add error method is still not fully working for me. So I'm definitely going to have to solve that in its own video at some point. I really do like that feature, but I'm surprised it's not working right now. Anyway, so let's go back and let's actually check out once again. And I'll go ahead and add in some data here. And it's still not actually giving me a empty value. So clearly something in my clean method here is failing. So let's go ahead and take a look. I'm going to go ahead and print out the shipping address and self.product and see what's actually coming through on that shipping address. Because obviously I'm leaving it empty, but it's saying that it's okay. So I complete this order again. And what we got is the product object itself. So this right here actually should be true. It should actually require shipping. So yet again, I want to print out what that is. So let's actually just print this whole value here and see if that's a true or false value. Right? So this is a kind of a rudimentary way to debug some of this data, is actually doing these print statements and running it that way. Another way to do this would actually be writing test cases, much like we did in day 6, and actually having test cases for all of these things. And that is probably the long-term preferred method, but the hey, let's make this work method is what I'm doing here. Okay, so it's still working. It's still actually coming through, and this is saying false. Okay, so what it's saying here is that both the self.product shipping and shipping address equaling to that is simply false. So why? Let's actually print out the self.product requires shipping. Okay, so yet again, and this is literally what I do, right? Like this is not something that like, oh, I'm just doing it right now. It's literally what I do when I have to diagnose some of these issues on the fly. Okay, so right now it's saying self.product requires shipping is false. So what I want to do is now say, if it's digital, then we do not want this to be required shipping. So for some reason, this is now saying that required shipping it's not digital. So this is saying false here, right? So it's not requiring shipping. So this actually should be saying true. So let me go into the product itself, and I don't have media in here. So that should be true. Let's actually print out that case. So I'm going to go ahead and print out self.isDigital again. And let's come back in here. Or not again, but in the first place. I'll go ahead and complete the order. And I'm getting true values. So this is peculiar, right? So the product should not actually be true. So let's get rid of a couple print statements in here so I don't confuse it too much. All right. And back to the checkouts here. Refresh. Okay, so true. This is now saying that it is not equal to none. Okay, so obviously we have an issue there, or rather, it's not equal to none, or it's not equal to maybe an empty string. Perhaps that's part of the problem. But I also want to print out what self.media is. So media and self.media. Okay, this time I'm going to get rid of that print digital part. And let's go back to that checkout. And here we go. Enter something in. So self.media is printing out nothing. Okay, so if it's not equal to none, which is correct, or it's not equal to that, then we've got it being correct. So this should actually be giving me a require shipping argument now with the or statement in there. So let's come back and refresh in here. And no, it is not doing that. Okay, so instead of trying to make this work, I'm not 100% sure why it's doing that, because these should be sending me back a true or false value, but for some reason it's sending back true. Let's just make it simple on ourselves and say require shipping. And do actually what we would end up doing in the real world. So let's go ahead and make migrations and Python manage.py migrate, and then run that server again. And we'll jump into the admin for this product and add require shipping there. And there we go. Okay, so back into this checkout. Complete order. Please enter your shipping address. Perfect. Okay. So we've got this forms validation error here. So this seems like it's actually calling it on the actual field itself, which is not what I set. But let's actually go ahead and put it on the field this way. Let's see if this actually does the exact same thing. And yet again. Okay, cool. So now that validation is actually working. Okay, so we don't have to do that in a different one. But this add error is going directly to the error or the actual field that we wanted to validate against, which is this shipping address here. And say, let's change the message saying this product requires a shipping address. Okay, so we save that. And come back in again and just try it one more time. There we go. Okay, cool. So this validation is certainly happening there now, which is really nice. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is get rid of these print statements. And now we have a much more robust validation for this particular product itself. All right, so one of the glitches that I had earlier when I was actually adding this add error is I was calling raise. That is not necessary in this clean method like this. Now again, we can actually have this exact same method in its own clean method for the shipping address itself, but in this case it actually makes sense to chain them together. Okay, so that is a very real example of something I was trying to solve something that shouldn't have been solved in a property method. All right, this is actually still potentially a problem for me in the future, which is something, yet again, I might want to actually move into a Boolean field. And this is why we test things out, and this is where you'll start to get an intuitive sense for when it's like, oh, am I taking too long trying to solve something that would be really easy to solve just by adding a field in the database? And in this case, it's definitely much better to have it in the field in the database so that we can have a query set that actually looks up whether or not it requires shipping. So the big question now is, oh, should we make it, well, is digital in here? Potentially we should add that in as a field too. But I'm not going to do that just yet. Instead, what I want to do is actually add in Bootstrap to this project now. Okay, so now that we have some of the glitches fixed with the checkout process, let's actually go ahead and add in Bootstrap now. So this is on getbootstrap.com. And it's really simple. This is not going to change in Bootstrap 5 even. So Bootstrap version 5 is roughly the same thing, which if you want version 5, which should be coming out actually pretty soon, maybe in the next few months, you're going to want to go in and get the same exact sort of stuff. So the starter template in here. That's all we're going to be working off of, the starter template, whether it's in 5 or in just regular Bootstrap 4. Both of them are in roughly the same place, right? So when in doubt, just Google starter template for Get Bootstrap. So this, of course, is what I'm going to go ahead and copy, and I'm going to bring it into my templates for base.html. Okay, so naturally, I've got my base.html in here, and well, let's go ahead and change most, if not all of it. First and foremost, I'm actually going to paste it below here. The reason being is I don't want to accidentally get rid of all of these block statements, right? So I'm going to put underneath all of the JavaScript here. I'm going to leave it in with their defaults that they have. So I'll get rid of these comments down here. And again, I mean, if we need long-term discussions on Bootstrap, we definitely can. I'm not really going to be using much of their JavaScript anyway in this case, but it is something that would be pretty cool to look at some point. And I do have a number of tutorials on Bootstrap too, if you are interested in that. Okay, so again, with the block content, we just move that over. You know, hopefully none of this is groundbreaking to you. If you're like, oh wow, this is really uncomfortable, then you know maybe learning some more HTML is going to be good for you. So in this case, I actually have the Bootstrap CSS at the top of the CSS line of things, and I actually want to put the block head that I created towards the end of the head tag itself. Now the reason for this is if I need to override anything that's coming in here, I can do that with this block head here versus any other method. Okay, so then the final title tag, I'll go ahead and override that as well. And now I'll get rid of everything that I had initially, except for we do still want load static in there. Okay, so we save that, and let's go and take a look at our project now. Okay, so it's definitely different, right? Right off the bat, my styling has changed a good amount. So I'm going to be implementing some Bootstrap styles. No worries if you don't know how to do this. You can follow along with me. The purpose of this is not so much to teach you Bootstrap, but to show you how quickly we can make a somewhat ugly looking site to being a lot better using some sort of front-end framework, right? So what I've got here is now just adding in a block of container and then a div class of a row. And I'm going to put that, actually, I'm going to put that inside of the block content itself. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get rid of that. And I'm going to go ahead and do BG dark and text white. Okay, so really fast, look at that. It already changed how it looks, right? So in this case, you know, perhaps I don't want to do that because of this image that's down here. It's not, it's not ready for black, but I can solve that pretty easily, which I will in a moment. So now that I've got this, maybe I actually want to have that same background on the entire page. So I add that background in, and now we've got a dark scheme going on. Pretty cool. Okay, so how do I actually go about changing this single product? Well, inside of the detail itself, this is where I'm going to make some of those changes. This is that snippet that we had. So maybe I want to have it in the product detail snippet, or I want to have it actually in the detail page. In this case, I actually do want to have it in the detail page, primarily because, yes, we certainly want to have those snippets in there, but I might actually want to rearrange how things are working. Right, so let's go ahead and do that. I'll say div class equals to row. So I'm going to put the whole thing in a row here, and we'll cut that out, paste this here. And now what I want to do is add a column. So I'm going to say div class equals to column. Okay, and there we go. So notice that I'm putting the column there. The next one is div class also equal to column, or col. And we'll put that one there. So I'm making the order part up here now, okay? So that's a little bit better. So now I can actually go ahead and click purchase, very similar to what I would in a normal project, right? So I'm also going to add in some Bootstrap classes here for BTN and BTN primary. Save that, and now we have that button here. Okay, so of course, what's really missing from here is some sort of navigation, so a Navbar. So inside of my templates, I'm going to go ahead and make another folder called base. This is really where I store everything that is sort of basic related data for these templates. So if I do navbar.html, that's a good example of one. Another one might be fave icons, which I'm certainly not going to add in, but this is now then I would come into base and import these various things. So inside of my container here, I'll go ahead and include base.navbar.html, right? Something like that. And then in the head tag, if I had fave icons, I would put them in here as well. So include fave icons.html and so on, right? So of course, those files are empty files. So let's go ahead and actually add in Navbar. Going into Bootstrap, getbootstrap.com, going into, I believe, components, and into Navbar. We can just scroll down in here, find the Navbar they have. I'm just going to get their first default here that has all of this stuff. I'll go ahead and copy that and bring it into navbar.html, save it. Okay, so obviously I'm not going to change anything just yet. And now if I refresh in my page, let's make sure that base.html is saved up. So base.navbar, okay. Navbar.html saved. Let's refresh in here. And there's our Navbar now. Okay, so there's BG dark now and Navbar dark. You know, a number of things that if you know Bootstrap well, it's going to be really easy to change these things. And margin bottom being 3. something along those lines. Okay, cool. So now we're getting a lot more. We're getting a lot closer to a more like robust and functioning web application, right? So just with a few lines alone, it's already starting to look a lot better. Now there is obviously some debate. Does this actually look better, or is it now jumbled because it's all in dark mode and there's certain things that are missing from this content itself? Well, yeah, of course. I mean, that's going to happen from time to time. So you as the developer are going to have to really just continue to hone these things. And that's where learning something like Bootstrap might be a good thing for you. But before we go any further with the Bootstrap stuff, let's actually change something about that product itself. And come in here, and I've got this div ID of inner. I can actually add in a class in here directly and say bg light and text dark. These, of course, are Bootstrap classes, but just a really quick and easy way to change our background to being a light background and all the text inside of there as a dark text, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and try that out. And we'll hit save here. We'll take a look now. Now our specs and all that actually looks a good amount better, right? So of course it didn't change everything about that, but it certainly changes a good amount of it. So the next thing would be maybe we add in some padding in here on both sides with px2. Actually, maybe we add it all around, and then we can add rounded here. Okay. So these classes are just a really simple and easy way to do that on this particular product. Obviously, not every product is going to do that or need something like that. Okay, so it's going to be really up to you on how you're going to go about designing that. But now we've got a little bit more robust of a product page or a landing page. We actually want to update our navbar. We don't have a search function. I mean, I did talk about a search view, but the search function doesn't fully make sense. But I will say if I break this down, notice that mostly breaks down with the exception of this image here. And we do have this purchase icon way at the bottom, which, may or may not be what we actually want to have. We might want to have it up higher. So if we were to change how that is done, I'm just going to show you really quickly how we would do that. And this is all Bootstrap, right? So what I would do here is I would actually change this to being another input itself or another snippet. Let's go ahead and say order btn HTML. Okay, so the order button snippet. And right here, I'm going to go ahead and cut this out, or maybe not the can order part, but rather, actually, let's leave in the can order part. I'll go ahead and cut that out or copy it and paste it in here. Okay, so there's a few variables that we need to pass in. The can order variable, the actual object, which is the product. So in this case, I'm going to actually call product in here. And then finally, the form itself. Okay, so again, in my snippets, I'm going to be using something very similar to this up here. And we just need to add in those few variables. So product equaling to object is still accurate. And then can order equals to can order. And then form equals to form. Okay, so let's get rid of that. So again, now we've got this snippet in here. If I refresh, looks like it's not actually coming through. So let's make sure. Oh yes, I'm using the wrong name here. So we're going to call this order btn. Okay, so we save that, refresh. There it is, no big deal. So what I want to do now is using a Bootstrap class. We'll say md block and d none. So what this means is at the medium size, it's going to actually display it. Anything below medium is going to be none. And so that means that up here, what I want to do is perhaps have the add to cart button up here. Now, there will be a lot of things to improve here. I just want to mention that, but I will say div class equals to d block, and then the opposite, which is basically dmd none. So at the bigger size, then we're not going to have that. So now using that snippet, I can actually import it in two different places essentially, and it will render based off of the CSS now. So it's not actually based off of anything else. So now if I break it down past medium, that purchase button is now at the top instead of at the bottom, which is probably where I'd rather have it. Right, so we could even take it a little bit further and break up the product detail snippet even more, right? So like maybe the product description, so product description or product content is its own block in there altogether. So then I cut this part out and bring in that here, right? So product content. And now what I'll say is if show content, then I bring in that same block. So end if, and again, include the products.snippets and / product content with product equaling to product, right? Okay. All right, so now that we have this snippet here and this content, this of course still means that we need to check if there is content in there. Then it will actually render it. So the nice thing about this now is I can actually use this snippet in my detail and change ever so slightly how this actually renders out. So then I'll put in include the content now and cut this out and put it right there. Okay, so this makes it at least a little bit more functional. Oops, this should be product content.html. Sorry about that. Let's go ahead and jump back in here. I'm guessing maybe some of you probably caught that. Maybe not. It's okay if you didn't. I didn't. We refresh in here, and now, okay, so now the product content itself is not actually showing up, but perhaps that's a few other reasons as to why. So let's take a look at the product content itself. So something in here that's not actually showing up. Maybe I didn't save everything correctly, which certainly happens from time to time, as you have seen me do over and over again. So we save that, and nope, still not rendering. So maybe now I'm actually yes, I see what it is. So right here, see that this should be object as well. Okay, so that was a simple little error that's really easy to overlook, but certainly something that we want to check, right? So when we're passing in variables down further and further. Okay, so now that I have that, it actually renders out correctly. And then when I break it down, what do you know? The purchase button is now there. Now, I know a lot of you that know CSS really well, you're like, well, this isn't necessarily the most effective way to do it with CSS. And I totally get that. This is not meant to be, hey, this is the best way to do it with CSS. It's just a way that you can start thinking about how you order things using some of the built-in features that Django has based off of the CSS you're using. And as we see here, I'm not actually doing very complicated things with Bootstrap. Even if you don't fully follow what each one of these classes does, you can see the result of them just by using some of the absolute simple things of how Bootstrap works. So if I change this to being a column of 2, that will also mean that the size of that is going to eventually go away at some point. So maybe I actually want to have this as column medium 2, and then this being just regular column. And if we break it down, so see, as this is where, if you don't know Bootstrap well, that one little gap right there is causing a little bit of an issue. So to solve that, yet again, another really easy fix, column medium 10, and we save that. And now if I break it down, it breaks down right at that same point. The button changes and moves locations. Pretty cool, I think. Very simple. Now, of course, there's a number of things in Bootstrap that we could add to the images themselves. I'm not going to do that. And I also want to get rid of the red style. I'm going to leave that up to you as far as how that part looks. So let's get rid of this altogether. Save that. And what do we have to do when we change our static files? Just when in doubt, you're always going to want to run collect static. So Python manage.py collect static. And yes, that changes all of our static files. And I think I have something cached here. So let's actually open up a private browser window. And what do you know? The actual CSS goes away and it's back to what it was. Okay, cool. So let's fix that nav bar. It's a really easy fix. It's just basically deleting a bunch of things. So the navbar is inside a base. Navbar. I'm going to call this the Django Bootcamp. And let me close some of these things down a little bit so it's easier to see. And really, the things that I don't need are all of pretty much everything in here. But maybe I do actually want to have something for like login if the user is not logged in, and register if they are also still not logged in. So register, I think we called it /register. And then finally, we would have something for log out if they are logged in. Okay, so log out. Let's go ahead and get rid of, well, the home page, we can leave that if we want, or maybe featured product, something along those lines. We can leave that link in there, but I certainly do not need this LI class. So if I break it down in VS Code right here, that's actually just a really easy way to delete an HTML element, among other things too. So if we break those things down, it's just like, oh, that's where it opens and that's where it closes. Okay, so the next thing, of course, is how do we actually render this better? In the sense that I don't always want login, register, and log out showing up, and perhaps I also want them to just be slightly different, right? So to make them slightly different, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this active here, this active class. What I want to do is say if request.user.isAuthenticated. Now, remember back to when we actually implemented some of the templates, we talked about the template context processors. So inside of settings, if we scroll down here, these context processors, this request right here, as well as this auth, allows us to do this on literally any of the templates that we render. So I'm going to go ahead and say if not request.user is authenticated, then they can do all those things, and then else we just have literally just have logout. Okay, so there we go. Simple enough. And I'm going to change the margin to be margin left auto. That's going to bring it all over there. Also fairly simple. And then px0. I think that might help our padding a little bit. And yes, it does. And again, these are Bootstrap things. If you're really wanting to learn more Bootstrap, let me know. I definitely think Bootstrap is well worth learning, even if there's other things out there that are also worth learning. Okay, so not quite done. Let's go ahead and go to this purchase part. This is one of those other things where, you know, maybe I want to have the shipping and billing and all that stuff on the left-hand side, and then the totals and whatnot on the right-hand side. Very, very simple to do that. So inside of orders in the checkout, yet again, we're going to be wrapping everything in a div class of row. Okay. And there we are. And then the first one, we'll go ahead and say div class equals to column. And column. And then column and column. Okay, so now it's kind of reverse as to what I want, but when I break it down to small, I actually want it back to how it was. So yet again, we've got an option to do that. This time I'm going to go ahead and say column medium being 3, and we're going to try pull right as a class, and this is going to be column medium and 9. Save that, refresh, and notice that it's almost the reverse of what I want, but if I break it down, it actually looks correct, right? So I now have a simple and easy way to do the checkout, but the larger size is not there. So one of the things about Bootstrap is these numbers, so 9 here and 3 here, they have to add up to 12 in order for it to be on the same row. So if it's actually, you know, let's say 5 here, it does make it a little bit bigger, but now they're no longer on that same row. And a really easy way to see what's going on is just by changing the background. If you say BG white, you can see approximately how big it is, and maybe like BG, I think it's primary, that would give you that blue call there. And now you can actually see how big that element is. So if I change this one to being, I don't know, 10, then I can see that, oh yeah, this is taking up that much space. I do have a whole series on this on my website that definitely covers all of these things if you're more interested. Okay, so let's go ahead and get rid of that. And what I actually want to do is change something called order and I think medium 2. So what that does is just change the ordering inside of this row really easily. And there we go. So now it's actually doing it as we expected, right? So really, really simple, a nice, easy way to do things. Complete order is not quite done though. So perhaps I actually do want to show the product details themselves, right? So the object that I never actually added in here. I think I'm going to actually put that on the top. So I'll go ahead and say div class, or rather not the top there, but I'll put it on the top of this one, call a medium in here. And we'll go ahead and say object.product.title, just to make sure that it's actually coming through. So we refresh in here, and there we go. So there's our title. And perhaps I want to have this in 2 places for all the details that I want, and say B and product, and yet again product.object.title, and there we go. So now we've got our product here, and then let's go ahead and add like an H2 or H3 in here, and we'll go ahead and put the price next to it, maybe as a small, and product.object or object.product.price. Now, hopefully you remember why I know that it's .product, as in object.product. Hopefully you are well aware as to that. Of course, it's because this checkout is based off of the order itself, and the order itself has the product field that's in there, right? Going back all the way to all those views when we did all of that checkout stuff. Pretty cool. Okay, so now with this checkout.html, I still have this snippet of form. I'm going to go ahead and add a btn class, being btn and btn primary. Okay, so this button class, I'll go ahead and add it into the snippet for forms. So snippet forms, and we'll give it a class equals to a string with that btn class. Okay, so I refresh, and now I've got that complete order there. There we go. Okay, so next thing is we would just complete that. Of course, I need to add in my billing address. I hit complete, and this product requires a shipping address. No big surprise there. I hit complete, and now it goes into success. Okay, so that's good. So now we definitely need to add in a success page. So in orders, I'll go ahead and do success.html. And so in my view, back into the order itself, when it is successful, that's this right here, we are going to go ahead and now say request.session, and we're going to go ahead and say order success ID equals to order object.id. So this is just basically, I mean, it's roughly the same thing as this, but it's now saying that it's the success ID, right? Or we can say checkout success order ID, just to make sure that our redirect will actually be able to view these things, right? So view that order being successful, which I'm actually not going to fully implement that, in the sense that I'm not going to implement everything that would go into that, because I think you know enough at this point to be able to handle that. So let's handle this checkout part, success, and actually coming back, let me rephrase that. I will actually handle parts of it, so the person who's purchasing a digital item can actually purchase that item. So going back into success, I'm going to go ahead and make a view for it. And let's call this the checkout success view. Login required. Checkout success view takes in the request. In this case, what I'm actually going to do is say query set equals to order.objects.filter user equals to request.user. And we also want to actually have it as paid. So let's make sure that we do do that, we actually mark that as paid, and we do right here. So into our orders, we want to grab the status that has paid as that status in that view. So scrolling back up, filter this, and then status equals to paid, and return render, and this is going to be orders success.html. Oops, we need to put in the request there too. So request, and then our query set, so QS, and QS. Let's actually use it a little bit better and say query set, or excuse me, let me use it like you would with class-based views. So object list is equal to that query set. So this is a very common way to put a query set inside of a render call. Okay, so order success. This is actually going to render for two things. So I'm going to actually call this order my orders. Okay, so this will be the success view, but it's really my order view, right? So let's call this checkout my orders view. Get rid of checkouts, just my order views. Okay, so then let's change success.html to being my orders. So let's rename this to my orders.html. Okay, so then we'll do for object in object list. I'm just going to go ahead and create a list element here. And we'll go ahead and add object.product.title and maybe the object total, as in the order total, or object.total. Okay, so now we've got that. Let's actually bring that view in as well in two places. Okay, so back into our URLs, import that order, and I'll put parentheses around this now, and my orders view, and then a couple paths here. So first off is going to be success, and then my dash orders, or like account orders or something like that. So let's just call it orders. So my orders view is going to be for both of those things. We save that. Now if I refresh in here, I probably have some spelling error or something like that. Oops, I put the import in the wrong place, or I duplicated it for some reason. Anyway, so now we've got that, and here's all of my orders. Perfect. That's nice to see. And if I also go into orders, didn't have a trailing slash. Okay, so let's add that trailing slash. And now I've got my orders here. So there we go. And if we wanted to download it, well, one of the things that I did do in the downloads was, well, it was based off of, I believe it was based off of the actual order ID in the session. No, I believe we actually talked about this, didn't we? Okay, cool. So a really good time to do it then. So I'm going to go ahead and say order ID equals to none. Okay, so this means that whatever that order ID is, we'll have to grab that order related to the user. So yet again, we're going to come back up here, grab this same query set, and we also want to make sure the download order has a login required. Okay, so down here now, we're going to pass in the order ID, which is ID equals to whatever the order ID is in this URL. This will give me that query set if it exists. If not, qs.exists. Then we will just return a redirect to orders, as in my orders. If it does, then we're going to go ahead and do the product object, or rather the order object equals to qs.first now. So one of the things is we see that this is saying media is null, being false. So perhaps we also want to do that for the order itself, for the product itself. So that also means that product underscore underscore, this is how you do a related field query set. This is probably one of the reasons that you would definitely want to have a foreign key. So the related field being inside of our order, we have this product right here, right? So that foreign key relationship allows me to actually do a robust query set just like that. Very similar to doing this query set, but now we actually have it based off of the order instead of based off of the product. Okay, so now that we've got that, we now have our order object, which means our product object is right here, just like that. And yet again, if it doesn't have media, then we'll raise that HTTP 404, or we can actually just return the redirect. Because again, we're really just pressing on this order to download something, and then if it's not there, it'll just redirect it. And then this is also true if the order ID is equal to none, we'll also return that redirect as well. Okay, so a lot of places to return that redirect, and I am repeating myself a few times, so you could probably clean that up a little bit. But now that we've got that, we actually have a way to download any given order. So bringing the download order or coming back to our download session here. So download order here. What we want to do is just update how this actually works. So the way it's going to work is very similar to what we've seen before, and it's really just order slash, and then in here we're going to do int, and well, I called it order ID, and then slash. Okay, so again, it's an integer because that's how my order IDs work, and now we have a way to download these orders, or at least in theory, we have a way to do that. Okay, so now inside of my orders, what I want to do is see if the model itself, or rather the product itself, if it can be downloaded. So the product itself says is digital, right? So we did have some issues with that before. So maybe this is still causing a problem. It probably is, but you know, we'll solve that some other time. Or hopefully you can solve that at this point, I should say. And say, I'll go ahead and now add a new property in here and define is downloadable. And I'm putting this in the order itself just to simplify things on my template. So we'll go ahead and say if self.product.isDigital, then we'll return true. Otherwise, we'll return false. So naturally, if not self.product, as in the product is empty, we'll go ahead and return false as well. Because remembering back, if we actually deleted that product from our database, this will become null. So we definitely want to make sure our property method actually handles that correctly. And this is a really good candidate for a property method, whereas the order now is definitely not built off of something our Boolean values would do. It would instead be looking it up based off of the product itself. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save that. And now inside of my orders, let's go ahead and take a look. And so in here now, we'll say if object.isDownloadable, then I want to actually do object.getDownloadURL. Notice I have not actually created that. So I'll go ahead and say end if. Okay, so we've got get download URL in here. And if I'm going to have a download URL, I might as well put it into an href itself. And we'll call this download. Okay, so what's this get download method here? This is actually fairly common, not necessarily the download URL part, but actually to assign URLs to like how they are formatted into the model itself. So the really common one is called get absolute URL, which is something that class-based views use all the time. So the get absolute URL is typically to basically where the detail view of this particular order would be. So like something like that. Now, obviously I didn't implement that, but the idea is now I can actually have another one called get download URL, which is going to work identical to this get absolute URL with one exception. We actually just add in orders here, or excuse me, download here. Now, again, in this case, I'm not actually doing any checks to see if it's downloadable or not. I have enough logic elsewhere to see if it is downloadable. I certainly can do it here, but I'd actually always rather return some sort of URL here, because if for some reason, you know, my property methods or my instance methods or all the view items are no longer there, then this will still absolutely work. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's go ahead and refresh in here. So notice that I do have all of these. They are all essentially saying they're downloadable, which means that my is downloadable is incorrect, right? So this right here is digital is not working. So yet again, yet another reason to just change this to being a Boolean value, right? So maybe it has to be and in here, not or. Perhaps that's the problem. But when I do that, it looks like none of my products are downloadable. So clearly there's something going on with my media itself that is not helping my cause at all. So what I'm going to do then instead is say Boolean field and default being false. We'll save that. I'm going to get rid of this property, save that, and run our migrations because I changed the models. So make migrations. And then Python manage.py migrate. Okay, so now that we've got that, let's jump back into our products and the ones that actually have media. This one doesn't. This one right here does. I'm going to go ahead and put it in here as digital. Does not require shipping. This one is digital here. Oh, that was the same one I just did. That's silly. So 3. I know that 4, the most recent one I did, does not have media, so we're going to leave that empty. And yeah, so I only have one that is actually downloadable. So perhaps that Boolean was working correctly. That is certainly possible. So let's go ahead and add one more digital item to the orders. So I'm going to come in here, change my most recent one to featured, and get rid of that. So I'll save that. Product 3 being in here. It is digital. Now I'm going to make this one featured, and this is going to be, $500 with unlimited inventory, roughly. And then we come back in here, and let's go ahead and order it. Go to the home page. Here we go, $500 purchase. We still need to fix the shipping address thing here, which we will. I hit complete, and there we go. So now I actually do have that download in there. Perfect. So that is solving that problem in a much more robust way. We definitely want to have it in as our product itself. Okay, cool. So what I need to do now is solve that shipping label problem, or getting rid of that shipping information. Now, of course, you might actually want the user shipping information even if it is digital, if you want to send them a thank you or something like that, or a sticker or some bonus. But of course, that's not actually how things would end up working. One of the things I did notice also is my Navbar brand needed to be /. Right? So when I actually clicked on this, it didn't take me to the home page, which is very common. So let's bring that back. Okay, so now going back into the checkout, this is probably the last thing we really need to do here. What I want to do is now check whether or not the product is digital, right, or shippable. So going back into our Boolean or our model for the product itself, during that checkout process, we see that we have this require shipping part. So inside of that checkout template, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to make it optional based off of CSS. So we'll go ahead and say block head here and in block. Okay, so we'll go ahead and say if object.product.require shipping, but really if it doesn't require shipping, then we're going to go ahead and add in a style tag for that. So let's go ahead and see what this class was. Again, so the class itself was shipping address class. Okay, so I can grab that shipping address class and say display none and important. Save that. We refresh in here. Now it just has the billing address, and we're off to the races. Cool. So naturally, maybe we want to have one more link on our Navbar. If the user has orders or not, we can come in here and just bring in our orders. And now the navigation's a little bit closer to how we'd want to do things. Okay, so naturally there's still some classes that we'd probably want to improve. I did already add the class for password, something I didn't do for the other ones, the username class and all that. So those are things that I would leave for you to do, because the password, or rather the account one, let's see here, the account one itself, right? So we actually added in the character fields just to give you a little, example of it. Let's just do one, and I'll say char, or rather text input and attributes equals to, and this is going to be class and form dash control. Okay, so we save that, and let's log out. Now my login is correct. So go ahead and fix the register part on your own. But that's it. That is it for the Django Bootcamp. Now, today we definitely did a lot of like glitch fixing and problem solving, but there's a number of things that we'd still want to do. We'd want to create tests for everything that I just did, right? So you'd actually want to go through the tediousness of creating those tests to ensure that this is all robust and working correctly. So, one of them, a simple test would be, hey, this git download URL. First of all, we want to make sure that it's the correct URL, but then we want to make sure that if the user actually buys the product, that product is downloadable and that it actually does download, or at least attempts to download what that product is. And of course, one of the big things that we really never talked about, there's a couple big things, but one of them is the actual credit card itself. So how a lot of these credit card features work is on a checkout view. What they end up doing is they will create a credit card token. So let's say CC token, and this is like calling from our CC processor, right? That will actually give us a token of some kind. That token itself would then be added inside of the context for the template. So then in the template itself, you would use something very similar to this block head, but you'd probably put it in JavaScript of some kind and initialize whatever that token was, right? So in the case of Stripe, it'd be like, I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's something like Stripe, like setup client, and then you would be passing in that publishable token that Stripe or Braintree or many of the other services would provide. And that's actually very simple on how to do it, but actually executing that well takes some time. And as you can tell, I already went over what I intended to do today because there's just a lot to cover as the somewhat final wrap up. So yeah, I mean, that's it for the Django Bootcamp at this point. I will say this, that I have a number of things that I'm going to record related to the bootcamp that will use a lot of this code. It just won't be done in this live format. It will just be done where I actually record it and put it on my live channel. So with that, I'm actually going to go ahead and show you one more thing prior to leaving, like as in some of the next steps that I recommend that you do. So let's jump back into the little slides here. Okay, so Python e-commerce 2 is coming. This is a full-fledged e-commerce application, and that link right there, which is also in the description below, is a survey, right? So if you fill out that survey, I'm going to try and tailor the content completely to that. So what we did here was 10 days long. Python e-commerce 2 is going to be massive. It's going to be so much bigger than this. So it's going to cover a lot of similar things that we did here, but it's also going to cover shopping carts. It's going to cover multiple products, so search engine. It's going to cover using something like React.js for the front end, and also just pure JavaScript. So it's going to cover a lot of things in there. Also, if you're interested in doing private training, this link will also be below. So check out that survey if you are interested in that. I still haven't solidified anything related to private training. So yeah, I think the reason that I haven't done that is because this stuff is, I think, more beneficial to a lot of people. Okay, so next steps. Here's a bunch of packages that I recommend that you look into. These are also in the description below. Now, these packages will help build your projects so much faster. So the first one, the Django Crispy Forms one. So that is going to make your forms already use Bootstrap by default. And it's much, much easier than what we did here. And it takes a lot less work to make it happen. Now, the reason I didn't include that here is because, as you notice, I haven't included really any third-party packages for Django at all, which is one of the biggest benefits of using Django. Is there are other developers out there that are making incredible packages that make building projects much, much faster. But it's my philosophy that you should know, generally speaking, what's going on prior to jumping into one of these third-party packages. So Django Crispy Forms is a good example of that. Next one is the Django REST framework. This one's incredible. I really, really enjoy the Django REST framework for building RESTful APIs. Now, you don't have to use the Django REST framework to do that. I have a whole course on how you can do it by pure Django, and then how you would do it with the Django REST framework. That's on cfe.sh. Next is the Django debug toolbar. Now, as a beginner, this is going to help you a ton, and as you get more advanced, it will also help you a ton. So some of the things that you would want to look out for is efficient queries, actually making better lookups to your database. So whether it's a query set or actually getting a specific object, that will absolutely help you with those things. It'll show you the queries that are happening and how long they take in some cases, and then also like not necessarily ways to solve it, but definitely ways that you can investigate on your own. Next, Django AllAuth. This removes all of the complexity in managing authentication. Even if it's just username, password, and email, it will actually send emails out for you. Doing email configuration is incredibly easy for Django, so take a look at my website. I have a blog post on it. It's really, really easy on how to do that. Next thing is Django hosts. So if you want subdomain management, as in not just www.yourdomain.com, but let's say, for instance, user.yourdomain.com or cfe.yourdomain.com. Django hosts can do that, and it does it incredibly well. I really, really like using Django hosts. I use it in the vast majority of my projects. That's actually true for all of these packages. I definitely use pretty much all of them in all of my my projects. Maybe not all the time, but definitely a lot of them. Django storages is the next one. So static files, getting all of those static files in a production-based environment. What we did with our static files can be just slightly changed to work with Django storages. It's not really that complicated either. So I definitely recommend that one as well. Now, using caching, so actually making your lookups happen less often from caching, Django Redis Cache is a great way to do that. That is certainly something that you might actually want to use from time to time. There are other ways to do caching. Memcache is another one, and Heroku has a number of things related to that as well, which we'll talk about in a moment. Django and Celery. So this is actually really good for offloading tasks. So let's say, for instance, you wanted to have a sales report that's related to all of this stuff. Or if you wanted to automatically have products or rather orders go stale, like we did with that management command, Django and Celery working together can actually allow for that. So it just literally adds a worker process so that you have your main Django project working and then Django and Celery working next to it. I do have a course that's coming out really soon related to this. It's called Time and Tasks 2, and that's on my website, so definitely check that out as well. Next, Django channels. So if you need real-time chat with your users, Django channels is an easy way to go about doing that. Just because it's an easy way to go about doing it doesn't mean that it's easy. Now, I do have a full-on channels course both on YouTube as well as on my website. So check that out. It's called Django Channels 2. And then on my website, I think it's called Chat by Channels. And that will actually show you how to use WebSockets and all these really cool things with Django. That's probably a little bit more advanced than what we're at. All these other ones are not nearly as advanced. Let's say, for instance, all of the Django Dash packages, those ones are not nearly as advanced as Django channels and Celery and Django. It just takes a little bit more work to get those last two in there. Okay, so proper next steps. I think you should learn enough JavaScript to be dangerous, right? So the reason I didn't cover JavaScript at all or anything related to JavaScript in this, which Django can certainly benefit from, is because, well, it's challenging to get it working if you don't know anything about JavaScript. So I do have a 30 Days of JavaScript series coming. I don't have a release date on that at all, but it's going to be very similar to my 30 Days of Python series, and it's going to cover a lot of the fundamental things of JavaScript. But even if you don't take that one, learning enough JavaScript will help you with these three things, at least these three things, if not many more. So accepting payments is a huge thing in e-commerce, right? We didn't cover that because it requires JavaScript. So Stripe, Braintree, those two require you to know some JavaScript to actually implement it. There are other third-party e-commerce payment processors that are out there that also require you to know JavaScript, at least on the web. So there has to be the JavaScript side or the client side, and then also the back end to actually accept payments. So take that as you will. Building better user interfaces. This is also a big one, like adding products to a cart and having that happen without the entire page reloading and stuff like that. That's a really simple example of why you would want to learn JavaScript as well. The other one is loading large or uploading large files. So we showed you how to upload files, but when they're really big, like a gigabyte, for example, that's going to take a while to actually upload, and we want to make sure that the user is well aware of that. That's where you would want to learn some JavaScript for that specifically. Now, a lot of these things I already cover on cfe.sh, so you can always check those things out. But this is just generally speaking what I think will end up making you want to learn that much more about JavaScript. And hopefully you're wondering, why can't Python do this? Why can't Django do this? Well, JavaScript was born in the browser to handle these sorts of things. Django and Python weren't. Like, they weren't ever meant to be a browser-based technology. Maybe at some point they'll change, but I don't actually foresee that happening because JavaScript has such a strong hold on doing these things and many other things. So that's where you'd want to learn enough JavaScript to be dangerous, I would say. Next, actually setting up a static file server. So this is what I alluded to with the Django storages part. Setting this up is not that hard, but it is something that you totally should be doing when you actually use your Django projects. Even if you're doing it locally, right? Even if you're just testing things locally, setting up a production grade static file server is a good practice to get in the habit of, because even if you're developing it locally, if all of a sudden you want to bring it into production, it's actually a lot easier to do once you already have that static file server set up. So that is something else that I definitely cover. Like, I cover all of these things, right? So like, you know, certainly that's part of the next steps. Is like, yeah, I'd love for you to learn those things from me. But the reason I cover all these things is because they are rather important to make a much better Django project. So next thing is deploying into production. So there's a lot of places that you can deploy into production, right? So historically, I've found Heroku to be by far the easiest because it just leverages Git. But a lot of things are actually building based off of Git as well. Git is a type of version control, so it monitors when you actually change your code, and you're able to deploy into production based off of that. Now, I cover this all the time, and I will actually deploy this project into production as well as a recorded video. I hope that will launch next week sometime. So the Django Bootcamp will be put into production as well as having a static file server. So make sure you subscribe to get both of those things. But the idea here is we absolutely wanted to deploy this into production, and I'll talk about some of the things that are related to that in that video, but that is certainly something that you're going to want to learn. Now, I also think that covering this over and over again is going to be something that will help you get more resilient to this, because things like Heroku certainly make it easy to deploy into production, but you don't always know exactly what's going on. So it is a nice idea to learn what is going on. Next is how to build a REST API. So this actually covers or combines with the JavaScript knowledge, or any sort of front end. So if you're building a mobile application, if you're building a a desktop application, if you're building a console application, a TV application, any of those applications can actually like consume Django through what's called a REST API. And if you think about, our templates are made for users pretty much, or real people. REST APIs are made for code to actually consume what it is that we're putting out there. It's like designed so that code can actually interact and work with it. The final and probably the most challenging of these, well, maybe JavaScript part would be the most challenging, But one of the most challenging things to do will be to use something called Selenium, which I cover in 30 Days of Python. Use Selenium to test your front end, to make all these automated tests so that you can just run python manage.py, run tests or whatever it is, to actually use Selenium to test all of your front end. The reason that this is probably the most challenging, not so much of technically the most challenging, but just like mentally the most challenging. It is fairly mind-numbing to write Selenium tests, I think, but it can be really, really important. And in fact, the Selenium tests might be more important than some of your built-in Django tests. The reason being is because the Selenium tests, hopefully what you're doing there is you're thinking through how a user would use any feature of your application, ideally all of those features, and then Selenium will test them as if they were a user. So I do cover how to do some automation type things in Instagram. You can use that same sort of concept to apply it to your own application to test as if you were a real user, which is really interesting to experiment with on your own. Okay, guys, so that is it for what I had for the Django Bootcamp. I really hope that a lot of you want more, like you're wanting to go that much further in Django. And if you are, please let me know in the comments after this live stream ends what it is that you want to see, whether it's in these next steps, whether it's in these packages, or if it's related to these upcoming items that I might end up doing. So, the Python e-commerce 2 is definitely coming, and I really hope that you guys do fill out that survey, because maybe not all of it will be on YouTube, but definitely some important parts will be on YouTube. I do intend to do that. Okay, so yeah, now let's go ahead and jump over to questions. So if you have any questions related to all of this stuff, I'm going to be answering those now. So feel free to ask them at this time. Okay, cool. So give me a second while I load up the questions too. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope that you got something out of the Django Bootcamp. I know that there's so much more that we can cover. There's so much more that we could do. But you know, there's only a limited amount of time that we all have, and this is where the bootcamp has to end at this point. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions, guys. I'm here to answer them now. So let's see here. Steve, thank you for the super chat. I appreciate it. Let's see here, guys. Guys and gals. Any questions right now? Alexis, thank you so much for the claps. You know, I realize like there's so much stuff that I could have covered that I might have even mentioned beforehand that I would be covering, but I only meant to cover 10 days worth of stuff for this bootcamp, and you know, we got through what we got through. So hopefully it was enough at this point. All right. Is there a way to autofill option as in same as above for billing address and shipping address? Yes, a lot of times this would actually run through JavaScript. But what you could do is you could make the billing address not required in the front end of things, and then when you're cleaning the method, you have a checkbox for same as above for billing and shipping. And if you have that checkbox in there, then in your form validation, it can check if that checkbox is checked and the shipping address has something, or it'll check if the billing address is in there. That's a good question. Really simple thing to do. JavaScript often handles stuff like this a lot better, just in the front end. Here's a good question. So why no Git in the tutorial? Git needs its own tutorial. I think that's what it comes down to. I really wanted to stick with just Django for the most part. Even the Bootstrap stuff, as you can tell, I didn't explain that much of it. But the reason I even did the Bootstrap part was to show you all of the little things that you might start doing with templates inside of Bootstrap. To think of them as a little bit smaller of chunks that you use throughout, like component type things, instead of trying to build every page full featured and recopying things and all that. But anyway, so Git will be coming at some point. So when I actually build or release this project into production, I will have to at least give a very quick rundown of how Git works and how it works with version control. Okay. Will I cover pagination? So pagination is actually very well covered, I think, in the Django documentation. And I think this was actually really valuable to do pagination. But as you see, the project itself didn't really tend towards needing pagination, except for maybe the order page. But realistically, Python e-commerce 2 will absolutely handle all things related to pagination, because we're going to have a lot of different products on there, not just one single product like we did here. Thank you for that question. Okay, so here's a good one. So send mail when something checked out. Yeah, so the sending emails is really easy to do in Django. I definitely cover this in a lot of places, and it's really called send mail. The function is called send mail, and you just add in some basic credentials there. So look at the Django documentation for that, or look at some of the blog posts that I have on how to configure it for things like SendGrid or even Gmail to send out email. It's really, really easy to do. Thanks for the question. I'm using Safari as my default browser. What are the differences between Safari and Chrome in terms of development? Why should I use Chrome instead of Safari? Good questions. Okay, so Safari I don't believe is on Windows yet, or Linux. Maybe it is at this point, but I'm pretty sure it's not. Chrome is the easiest one to develop with because it's on all of those systems. Now, I will also say that Firefox is another really good example. But honestly, all three of those browsers you can absolutely use, and just pick the one that you want for your default. Just make sure you turn on developer settings on any of them. I think Chrome has them on by default, but the developer settings allow you to inspect things like I did. So if I actually show you this, let's just jump in real fast. So inside of Chrome, if we see this inspect part, let me get rid of those links there. This inspect part, what it does is it will actually allow you to view all of the HTML elements in here. So this is the HTML code. It will also give you the console in here. This is the JavaScript console, but if you actually used anything related to JavaScript, you could actually write it inside of this console, right? So I'm sure you've seen these kind of alerts before. So those two things are in most modern browsers. So Firefox, Chrome, and Safari all have those things, but you just need to make sure that they are actually activated, because in some cases they are not. I think Safari sometimes doesn't activate them by default, and you have to go in and change your settings for that. But there's really no huge advantage over it. The reason I use Chrome is because it's available to everyone, and I just give Chrome slightly the edge to Firefox, although that's not always true. Thanks for the question. Okay, let's see here. You enjoyed the bootcamp. Thank you, thank you. You'd like to see the new packages in coming sessions? Yeah, potentially. It just depends on a number of things. So hopefully, if a lot of you guys want to see those things, just let me know. All right. So let's see here. So 2 days ago, I did the code in the order checkout view. Yes. Where did the order ID come from? That was, well, actually, it seems like maybe you missed it from earlier days, because I definitely did it at some point. But essentially, it was before we changed how the order checkout worked, where the previous order ID would have came from a previous time that you went to the checkout part to actually view one of those products itself, and that's where it comes from. I actually think it might still be in the code there, but I'm not positive with that one. So yeah. Thanks for the question. Next up, hello from Brazil. Hello, how's it going? Welcome here. Can we use Django as microservices? If yes, how? Absolutely. I think Kubernetes is the way you would do it. You make Kubernetes a Kubernetes cluster, and you actually put Django as one of the nodes in that cluster, and now Django is a microservice and a greater service that is Kubernetes. That's a really simple way to do it. Django could be the primary service that's running other microservices, or it can be another microservice in there. Thanks for the question. Oops, we already answered that one. Okay. Do I have any courses or videos about React? Yes. Yes, I did. Yes, I do. Right now, there's one called Try React.js. That is a little bit older. That one uses class components instead of functional components. And then I also have a Create a Django and Tweet Me course, or Create a Django and React course called Tweet Me 2. That's also on YouTube as well as my website. Tweet Me 2 is on my website. That one right there combines functional React components with Django and the Django REST framework. And really, if you did okay in this bootcamp, if it wasn't too hard for you, you would probably be ready to go ahead and jump right into that course. Because the React portion of that, I think I take it nice and slow and explain as to why you actually need React over just pure JavaScript. So that would be a really good next step as far as courses are concerned as well. So yeah, thank you for the question. Can I take these next courses right now, or should I still play around with the basics of Django for a while? So Hemeth, the one I just mentioned is probably a really good course for you to jump into. It doesn't use Django 3.0. It uses Django 2.2, I believe. I don't actually remember exactly what the version is. That doesn't matter. What we learned here today hasn't changed much over the years, right? I didn't really use a lot of the cutting edge Django 3.0 features. I think with one exception was the forms validation part. I think that was pretty much it. But you're totally ready to go and do that one. It's more comprehensive, of course. And if you want to build on top of your e-commerce skills here, you can go and take the e-commerce course that I have on my website. So that's, cfe.sh right here /courses. That's Python e-commerce 1. That one uses Django 1.11. So there are some subtle differences, but it's still Django, and pretty much all of that still works in modern day Django as well. So you're definitely ready for that one too, especially if you weren't incredibly lost this whole time. Cool. Let's see here. Thank you, Augustin. I appreciate it. Glad it was helpful. All right. How would you implement a history of changes? Easy staff members and you like to know who and when data changed. So I'm assuming maybe in the admin, even if it's not in the admin, you can actually add post-save signals for this. So every time anything in any model, you can actually use post-save signals to store the history of what changed. There's a number of ways on how to go about actually executing that. But what I would do at the simplest level is to grab that model, any model it is, in the post save, and then use generic foreign keys to associate to what that model is. Generic foreign keys is similar to regular foreign keys, except it's not a direct association like what we have here. So querying it is a bit different. But as far as implementing the history of changes, that would be a way to do that fairly easily, I think. So thanks for the question. So the creation of a PDF document be in Python e-commerce 2, potentially. Answer that survey, because the more people that answer that survey, it's going to take a while before I actually start Python e-commerce 2, because I have a few other things I need to finish prior. But if you answer that survey, I'm definitely going to send it out again. If you're a member on cfe.sh, I will send out that survey probably a few times, because I want to get that as full featured as possible. So we'll see. I think it would be a nice addition potentially, if it makes sense. I'm not actually sure why you would need to create a PDF for e-commerce, maybe as an order form or an order invoice receipt type thing. If it needs to be a PDF, it could also just be an easy single document, but perhaps people want a PDF. So Thanks for that. That's a good question. Hey, Raphael from Belgium. Nice. Here, Django is unknown to a majority of developers. You'll launch a tutorial in French in order to populate it. Oh, cool. That's a good idea. Once you do, let me see it. I don't know French, but I would love to see what it is that you're doing and how I might be able to help. But it sounds like if you got some things away from this Django Bootcamp, perhaps you want to learn a little bit more about Django before you go full on launching tutorials. Maybe just a little bit, but that being said, you will learn a lot by creating a tutorial yourself, especially if you do it live. It's just a whole nother level of challenge because you can't just stop and be like, I don't know what I'm talking about. I mean, I guess you could, but it's probably not nearly as interesting or entertaining for everyone else. But anyways, good luck with that. So let's see here. What about a progressive web application and Django? So the progressive web application, I believe, would have to be written in JavaScript itself, and then you use REST API calls to a Django project, probably using the Django REST framework or something like that. You know what I mean? Next one. What is your approach to getting a professional pixel perfect views for Django applications? What does that even mean? I think you're saying, like, how do you make it look really, really cool or really well crafted and done? My approach is using a framework like Bootstrap and then modifying things here and there as I need. So Bootstrap is not the only like library for design in the front end. So there's other ones like Material, I think, or is it Material? I'm going blank on the other one, but Foundation is another one. And you have a lot of options to just using these pre-built, front end CSS libraries that make it really easy to make your site look great. Another option, which would be a good learning experience, would be to purchase some of the more popular templates on some of the theme places and see how they approach building that content. From there, then you can tweak, any sort of framework that you need to do that. So my approach is to use somebody else's skills in CSS and HTML. CSS is really easy at its core. Like, it's simple to do CSS, but it's also simple to paint, like a paintbrush on the wall, right? That's really easy to do, but to paint a great painting is not so easy, right? I think CSS is very similar to that. So using somebody else's skills to actually learn from what they did is how I approach to improve the way my sites and applications look. But how much does that matter? I actually don't know. I mean, look at Amazon.com. I think Amazon has a lot of good things about the design of it, but it is got a lot of things going on. And if you compare it to like Apple's website or Google's or Facebook, even, like, those three other sites are so much cleaner and have less going on, and yet Amazon just dominates as far as e-commerce. So I don't know. Does that answer your question? Maybe. Okay. So I'll answer a few more questions to finish this thing off, and then maybe we'll do another live Q&A sometime soon. So yeah. Next question: how can the admin UI look nicer and be more beautiful? Yeah, so there are templates for the Django admin, and you can override those templates as well. It's really easy to override those templates. It's very similar to overriding any templates in your project. So if you look at the Django code itself and look for the templates directory related to the admin, you can see all of the templates that the admin has, and then you just override those. I'm positive there are third-party applications that can override those easily, where you just do pip install and something related to the Django admin, or you can get a template, like I said just a minute ago about CSS and HTML, to override them as well. Thanks for the question. Let's see here. How to auto adjust the PK, the IDs when deleting some records? So they automatically do adjust. So I think maybe you're saying how to sort of reset them. That's not a default behavior that Django has. I'm sure there's a way to do it, but realistically, if you're going to do something like that, you might as well just have another key in there that you control completely, and still leaving the auto ID or auto primary key, but have another key in there and flag it for being a database lookup field, to make the database lookups more efficient. That would be a way I would think about doing it. And maybe even changing your primary key, the default one or the built-in one, to being a UUID field instead of being a auto integer field. Good question. Okay, Michael, thank you for watching. Yeah. Live Camp Maester. Yeah, you're looking at the courses. Great. Valar Magulis. Yes, absolutely. Huge Game of Thrones fan, obviously. Me too. I really, really enjoy Game of Thrones. Until maybe like what, season 6? That's like when it went off the rails a little bit. But up until season 4, maybe even season 5, probably the best show that's ever been created. I had a long time coming around to it, but it's a really, really fun show. At some point, it'd be awesome to have a automatic editing tool using AI and machine learning that will watch all of Game of Thrones and every day send me like a cool little 2-minute clip or something like that, so I can watch that just to remember how great Game of Thrones is. Maybe someday I'll have something like that. I don't know. Probably not. Anyways, so thank you for watching, guys. Appreciate it. Let's see here. I'm almost fully caught up with you guys. Thank you for watching, Sagar. I'm glad you learned so many things. And make sure you subscribe. Go to my channel. I have a lot of stuff on there that you can learn from right now. So you don't necessarily have to wait for future videos for that. In this bootcamp, you are covering async views with Django. No, I did not cover asynchronous views with Django, because there's so much more basic stuff to get to prior to doing asynchronous views, or class-based views even, for that matter. So asynchronous views are well covered, I would say, inside of my Django channels video. So Django channels uses asynchronous views, and they're not a whole lot different with modern versions of Django, because they were implemented because of Django channels, right? So Django channels proved how well asynchronous views can be done. So thanks for the question. I'll probably actually end up doing some sort of basic video on that at some point as well. Cool. I'm glad you agree with me on the show, Hemeth. Don't worry, I'll build that Game of Thrones AI app. Yeah, maybe at some point. The other thing I was thinking about for a automatic editing application is to take some of my older content and get out snippets that are relevant still, like maybe a minute long, 2 minutes long, or something like that. Because some of these things, you know, this has been over an hour today, almost 2 hours now. You know, it just takes a while to finish these things off. So it'd be nice to actually have some questions and stuff like that just pulled out by default. We'll see. Anyways, Sagar, thank you for subscribing. I want to develop an e-commerce website by Django. Which program is needed for that? Yeah, so my e-commerce 1 class is there. Oops, and that's on cfe.sh/courses. If you go there, you will see that. And then I will say that I mentioned this a little bit ago, so maybe you didn't see this, but I also have in the comments of this video on YouTube, I have this link for Python e-commerce 2. That is coming soon. I don't have a release date yet, but if you go to that link, there's a survey there, and I'll let you know when that course actually comes out and anything related to it. Okay, so I think that's it, guys. Looks like we've finished off everything here. I actually caught up to all the questions too. Not as many questions today, but you know, we got some of them. I think maybe some of you saw and wrap up. You were like, "Oh no, this is over. That's not fun." Here's an interesting one. So maybe a weekend live stream. Where'd it go? So a weekend live stream where I explain some concepts in every detail every weekend. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of work. So I did this live stream as a test. So this live bootcamp stream as a test to see like how challenging it is to do a live stream and if I could even sustain it while teaching for multiple hours at a time. And I will say doing a 2-day live stream would be very, very challenging to do, in the sense that me talking for 5 hours straight, I totally could do it, but it's incredibly exhausting because I try to say so much in such little time. So if I slowed down a bit and didn't talk as much, perhaps it would be a lot easier to do a weekend thing. But I've come to realize that that is just not for me. Maybe sometime in the future I can do some more slower version of that. And I did talk about doing a private session weekend type thing. That would actually not require me to do only talking the entire time. It would actually have some interaction quite a bit with the students that actually showed to that. But I've had varying degrees of interest in doing that private bootcamp. So a lot of people were really, really interested in doing it. But I created that survey to see exactly where everyone is, because perhaps maybe something that would be better is doing private sessions where it's very similar to this, but it's like an hour or two a week, or maybe three hours total a week over a couple of days. And then that way I can solve problems directly that you're having. Then you can spend another week to try and fix those problems or add new features. And then we can come back and chat some more in more of a private training session type thing. So maybe check out the survey for that to see if that's something that you'd be interested in. Because just doing this stuff over a weekend might be really, really good, but it also might be better that I give you some time in between, like giving feedback or lessons to catch up to what you want to do and what you need to do. So yeah, thank you for that. Next one, you'd love to see more content on Django. Absolutely, there's definitely more coming, so thank you. Thanks for the love, appreciate it. And yeah, hey from California, thank you for checking us out, and France. All right, guys, so that's it for this one, for the Django Bootcamp, first one in the books. I honestly have no idea if I'll do another bootcamp. I definitely will do more live stuff, but doing this live training brings a whole heap of issues that I knew that would probably happen, but I didn't know how much I would enjoy it or how much you guys would enjoy it. So maybe some of you absolutely just feel like boot camps are the way to go. We have to do more boot camps. If that's the case, let me know. You got to keep bugging me. And here's a couple places that you can, right, on my YouTube or on my Twitter, and just let me know if you definitely want to have more of these live versions, or if there's some sort of hybrid that would work out well, right? So like a good example of a hybrid would be I actually record a production level version of the whatever the bootcamp lesson is, and I literally do a playback of that live, and then I just jump on and answer questions shortly after. I think maybe some people believe that's actually what's happening in this, but it's not. I've actually been doing all of these things live every step of the way. So yeah, anyways, thanks so much for watching the Django Bootcamp, and I hope to see you in the next one. Take care.